Here is part 1 of our vocabulary lesson for IELTS speaking. Today we'll be learning key vocabulary and phrases that you can use in part 1 of the IELTS speaking test. Instead of going to the banned descriptors to discuss why vocabulary is so important, we just need to know that we should show a wide range of vocabulary. In other words, we don't repeat ourselves too often. The more advanced and how accurately you can use it, the higher your band score for lexical resource will be. Here is a quick review of what part 1 in the IELTS speaking test looks like. It will last between 4 to 5 minutes, and you will be given 12 questions about you, your life and your home. The examiner will be asking you these questions. Now, there are a number of topics that could come up in part 1 of the IELTS speaking test, but generally they are around you, your life and your home. Here is a short table showing you some of the most common topics, and definitely some of these, possibly all of them, will come up in your IELTS speaking test. It might be an idea to write these topics down and create some short speaking parts with brilliant vocabulary that you can practice talking and speaking with. In this lesson, we'll be looking at key vocabulary and phrases for the first 4 topics of work, study, hometown and family. That's because these 4 topics are extremely common in the IELTS speaking test, and I guarantee that all of them will come up on the day of your test. Before we move on to this topic-specific vocabulary, I've got a quick exercise for you. I'm going to show you some common Part 1 questions and answers that you could also get. The first example answer I give you will be a poor example, or something that would score a low band score. I'm then going to ask you to try and choose parts of the answer that you could change and improve. Let's take a look at the question. What kind of food do you most enjoy? And here is my not so brilliant example answer. I like plain foods the most. Sandwiches are my favourite food. They are nice. Now, as I'm sure you can clearly see, this isn't an excellent answer. The vocabulary is quite low, and there also isn't much of an opener included. So pause the video, especially look at the underlined vocabulary, and think, how would you improve this answer? Do that now, and then I'll show you my better example answer. Okay, let's take a look at the better improved example answer. That's a very good question. I usually prefer plain foods the most. Sandwiches are my favourite food. They are really delicious. So I've added a conversation filler or conversation opener to begin, and that's something that you should try and do quite often in the IELTS speaking test. In change of like, I've added usually prefer. And instead of nice, I've added really delicious. Nice is a pretty boring word, and I don't suggest you use it if you can possibly avoid it. Let's take a look at another example of one of these exercises. Are you currently studying or working? And here is my low-level example answer. Now, I'm studying maths at university. It's very hard, but interesting. Take a look at the underlined vocabulary and think how you could up-level it. Okay, let's see an improved answer. At the moment, I'm studying maths at my local university. It's very challenging but fascinating at the same time. In place of now, I've used at the moment, and this is my opener. I've actually changed slightly university to local university, and it's important to give extra details in your speaking. Instead of hard, I've used the better piece of vocabulary, challenging, and instead of interesting, I've gone with fascinating at the same time. So there are two examples of how vocabulary is really important in the IELTS speaking test. And it's also very important to really explain and develop your speaking, just like I've shown you here. Next up, I've actually included some vocabulary for the very first section of your IELTS speaking test, and that is as soon as you open the door. It is your introduction, and here are some questions and example answers. And please do note down this language because it's something that you can almost copy and paste and repeat in your IELTS test. So, the first question you will most likely get is, "Hello, could you show me your identification card, please?" At this point, you can say, "Yes, here you go." Next up, the examiner may say, "Could you tell me your full name, please?" Now, it's important not to just say your full name. For me, I wouldn't say David Gareth Morris and just leave it at that. As with the other sections of the IELTS speaking test, you need to extend and develop your answers. So here is an answer that you can very much replicate for this question. Of course, my full name is David Gareth Morris, although my friends call me David. Here is another question that you could quite possibly get in the very first introduction phase of the test. How old are you, David? I was born in 1987 on July the 17th. That makes me 30 years old right now. So these three answers I've given you show you some top vocabulary that you can use, and all you need to do for the last two answers is to provide your personal information to make the answers your own. Now it's time to move on to our topic-specific vocabulary. And the first topic is work. The first piece of vocabulary that we will look at is occupation, which is a synonym or another word for job. Let's take a look at the example sentence. My current occupation is customer service at my local restaurant. I'm doing this to make some money whilst I study. A dead-end job. This is a job that you won't do forever and has no possible benefits. I must admit, I'm in a real dead-end job right now. I'll be looking for something better this year. And next up is vocation. Vocation means a job that you are very passionate about. Being a nurse is my vocation. Since I was young, I've always wanted to help people feel better. And the last piece of vocabulary for work that you can use is profession. And again, it's another synonym for job. A teacher is a respectable profession. My father was a teacher and his father was a teacher too. Let's move on to our next topic, which is study. And the first piece of vocabulary is graduate, which means to finish a certain section of your education. Here is the example sentence. In 2015, I graduated from the famous university in my city. I was studying to be an engineer. And next up is challenging, which means difficult. My final project at college was very challenging, but I learnt a lot from it. Assignment means a piece of work given to you from your college or university. Last year, I had to complete so many assignments. I almost didn't have time to sleep. And the final piece of vocabulary is intensive, and it means something that is very challenging, difficult, and there is lots to do. The IELTS course in town is very intensive. I have to attend 10 hours per week for 2 months. Let's move on to our next topic, which is hometown. The first piece of vocabulary is bustling, which means somewhere with quite a lot of people and a lot of activities going on. London is a completely bustling city. I loved visiting there over the last 3 years. Hopefully I can live there soon too. And next up is isolated, which means something very far away from anything else. My hometown is pretty isolated. The closest city is an hour away by car. Now we have suburbs, which is a part of a city or town that is not in the city centre but not a long way away. It might be a place that is popular for people to live and move into the city centre for work. I enjoy living in the suburbs. It's still quite peaceful, but only a short train journey into the city centre. And lastly is neighbourhood. My neighbourhood is very friendly. We all know each other and spend a lot of time together in our homes. And now for the last 4 pieces of vocabulary for our final topic, which is family. And we'll begin with close-knit, which means a family that is very close and speaks or is with each other a lot of the time. My family is very close indeed. I definitely say we are quite close-knit as we see each other every day. It's often used for families when you're describing them and you have a great relationship with your siblings. And that brings me nicely onto the next piece of vocabulary, which is siblings. This is another word which you can use to describe your brothers or sisters. I have 2 siblings. They are both younger than me, but we get along very well. And supportive means a family that will help you no matter what your decision. My parents are so supportive of me, which I have always been very grateful for. And now our final piece of vocabulary for family, which is squabble. And this is quite simply a synonym for argument. I sometimes squabble with my older sister. It's never a bad argument and we say sorry after. There are quite a few pieces of vocabulary that you can use for very common topics in part 1 of the test. I also highly suggest that at any point during this course, if you see some vocabulary that I use and write down in the examples, that you practice using it. That brings us to the end of vocabulary for IELTS Speaking Part 1. Next up, we'll move on to some more useful vocabulary that you can use in your IELTS speaking test.